David's family dynamics. David had not one wife, but many wives and many concubines. Now, I probably wouldn't even have to say any more for you to know there's going to be trouble in paradise, right? If you have many wives and many concubines, there's going to be trouble. And so we're going to look at some things that came in David's family and how he ignored those things and what came from that, with him not dealing with the offenses that came in his family. We're going to go to 2 Samuel chapter 13 to start out, and that's where we're going to hang out today. It's not a passage that I preach on, that I don't know that I've ever preached on this passage before, but it's really, when I prepared last week's message, I knew that this was the passage for this week. And I'm not sure what we're doing next week, but I knew this was where we were going this week. So we're going to start in chapter 13, verse 1. In the course of time, Ammon, the son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, the son of David. Now we're going to stop right there, and we're going to look at some information. There's a chart, Diane, of David's family, if you would put that up. First of all, he had a lot of siblings. And I think, I put both the same thing. Shoot, both those charts are the same. So he had a lot of siblings. We're going to talk about one of his siblings today. But these are David's wives. So ignore the top one, the top title. Michal was his first wife, and she had no children. She was Saul's daughter, if you remember. The next wife had Amnon, was his, so that was his firstborn son. And so really, the kingdom should have been passed down to Amnon, right? He would be the logical next heir of the throne. Then Chileab and then Absalom and Tamar were both from Makkah. I don't know how you say her name. And so those two were full brother and sister, Absalom and Tamar. Then Adonijah, and then some others. He had a lot of kids, but these were the first, okay? He had some from wives, some from concubines. So we're going to look today at two of these. We're going to look at Amnon, and we're going to look at Absalom and Tamar, all right? Those are the children that we're going to look at. And Amnon would then be a half-brother to Tamar, okay? They have the same dad, different moms. Okay. All right, let's go on to verse 2. Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister, Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, son of Shemiah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. Now let's just stop there and get all of this straight. Jonadab was the son of David's brother, which would mean that the two boys were what? Cousins. So he's got a cousin living there, and they are pals. And we're going to see what kind of scheme this Jonadab comes up with. He was very shrewd. He asked Amnon, "Why do you think the king's son looks so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me? After all, you're the king's son. You should be able to have whatever you want, right? You've got the power. You live in the family. Why are you downhearted?" Next verse, Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." And verse 5, "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab said. "When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so that I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.'" Now, this cousin was shrewd, right? And he is feeding Amnon some ideas about what to do. And Amnon's buying into it, right? Because it's what he wants to hear. It's telling his itching ears what they want to hear. And he's like, "Oh, good idea." Does it matter what kind of friends we keep? It matters. Can that even be family members that lead us down the wrong path?
Amen.
Yes. All right. verse 6. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. He did what? He did follow the bad advice. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand. And David, now I want you to think about this. He has no clue anything's up, right? Why is that? Why did David not think that was strange? On that chart, there was only one daughter. David has like scads of sons listed in the Bible. And there's one daughter, Tamar. That's it. That's all that's listed. And David has no clue what Amnon's about to do, apparently. David sent word, verse 7, to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar did what her dad told her. She went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down, and she took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. And then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat it. She's obedient. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. Another place where things could have been stopped. David could have stopped it. The people in the room could have stopped it. Let's see what happens. So everyone left. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here to my bedroom so I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the bread she prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister, which was against the law of Moses. Verse 12, don't, my brother, she said, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where can I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He won't keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. And then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he loved her, than he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up and get out. So many chances that could have not happened. She does as she's told. She pleads for him not to do this. And he only thinks of himself. He doesn't think of his father and the disgrace. He doesn't think of what it's going to cost her. As a woman in ancient Israel, she lost her whole future in that moment. She couldn't marry. She couldn't have children. She had to live in shame the rest of her life. Selfishness. And then he kicks her out. Verse 16, no, she said to him, sending me away would be greater wrong than what you've already done to me. But he refused to listen to her. And he called his personal servant and he said, get this woman out of here and bolt the door after her. So his servant put her out, bolted the door after her. She was wearing a richly ornamented robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. And Tamar put ashes on her head, tore the ornamented robe she was wearing, and put her hand on her head, and went away weeping aloud as she went. Now, I want to parallel this. I'm cold and I'm taking decongestants, and so I'm really... I want to parallel this to what David did. The sins of the father, the sins of the father, the sins of the father. What did David do with Bathsheba? He looked and he wanted, right? Were there people that could have stopped him? Yeah. Did they? No. He destroyed Bathsheba's life, right? Took what he wanted. Didn't have any regard for anybody else. Verse 20, her brother Absalom said to her, has that Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet. Now, here, listen. Be quiet now, my sister. He's your brother. Don't take this thing to heart. And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. Dirty little family secrets. Dirty little family secrets. And you know, I would like to think that they never happen in churches, but the fact of the matter is they do. And it can be a lot of different things. Dirty little family secrets. Watching pornography. Oh, if anyone knew Dirty little family secrets. Don't tell anybody. You can't let anybody know. Because you know the most important thing is that I look good. That everybody thinks all's well. Thank you. Hush, hush. Just don't share. Verse 21, when King David heard all this, he was furious. Now let's watch what David does. Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He didn't say a word. But look, he hated Amnon because he disgraced his sister Tamar. And what does it say David did? He did nothing. You're right, Patty. He did nothing. Now, is that an offense that needed to be dealt with? It is. There are offenses that we can let go, like whether you put the toothpaste cap on, and there are things that matter, that we need to take a stand on, that we need to say, this isn't right. This isn't okay. This can't be. Don't sweep it under the rug. Don't keep it all quiet. Things need to be dealt with. And we're going to see the result of not dealing with serious offenses in the next verses. Verse 23, 2 years later. So for 2 years, Absalom is feuding. Remember, he said nothing, but he hated his brother for what he did. And he watches his dad, and his dad does nothing. He lets it go. He's angry, and he lets it go. And so Amnon, for 2 years, is getting angrier and holding on to the offense. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep shears were at Baal Hazor near the border of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. And Absalom went to the king and said, your servant has had shears come. Will the king and his officials please join me? So he asked David, hey, would you come? Dad, I need you to come. And what does David say? Absalom asked him to come. And verse 25, no, my son, the king replied, all of us shouldn't go. No, I don't. I've got other things to take care of. I don't need to do that. We would only be a burden to you. Although Absalom urged him, he still refused to go, but gave him his blessing. Verse 26. Then Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon come to us. Now David had to know that Absalom was upset with Amnon. And yet he said, no, I'm not going. And he sends Amnon to the sheep shears. And the king knows by the next sentence. The king asked him, why should he go with you? But Absalom urged him, so he sent with him Amnon and the rest of the king's sons. And Absalom ordered his men, listen, when Amnon is in high spirits from drinking wine, I say to you, strike Amnon down, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Have not I given you this order? Be strong and brave. So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. And then all the king's sons got up and mounted their mules and fled. And so David does nothing, and Amnon dies. And Amnon's sin has now crept into Absalom. We see that Amnon's sin that was not dealt with then corrupted another life. Not only Tamar's, but Absalom's as well. And the rest of the story is, well, we'll keep going here for just a minute. While they were on their way, the report came to David. Absalom has struck down all the king's sons. Not one of them is left. Sounds like Job, doesn't it? The king stood up, tore his clothes, and lay down on the ground, and all his servants stood by with their clothes torn. But Jonadab, now look, have we heard his name before? Jonadab, have you heard him? Yeah, he's the one that advised Amnon to do what he did. But Jonadab, son of Shemiah, David's brother, said, my lord should not think that they killed all the princes, only Amnon's dead. Now he's back with the king, and nobody else has arrived back yet. So how did Jonadab know that? How did he already know that only Amnon was killed? he had to be in on the plot, right? He had to know ahead of time that's what Amnon was planning. This has been Absalom's expressed intention ever since the day Amnon raped his sister Tamar. He knew, and David was clueless, because David withdrew from his children instead of being engaged. My father the king should not be concerned about the report that all the king's sons are dead, only Amnon's dead. Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. Now the man standing watch looked up and saw many people on the road, and we're going to stop there. I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. Dirty little secrets. And they don't go away. They don't go away. They have to be dealt with. And Absalom then runs. He runs to Geshur, where his grandpa is. His mom, Absalom's mom, was the daughter of the king of Geshur. And so Absalom knows ahead of time, this is wrong. But this rage, this bitterness, this offense that was not dealt with when it happened, built and grew roots and got bigger and bigger and bigger until Absalom acted out and murdered. And David stood back. Does it sound so familiar with what David did with Uriah as well? David sent other people to kill Uriah while he stayed back at the palace, right? And now his son tells others to kill his brother. David had to be thinking that. And then Absalom flees to his grandpa's, and he stays there for a couple of years, and he wants to come home, and David wants him to come home. So finally there's this conversation, and David says, okay, Absalom can come home. And so Absalom comes home, but he's not allowed to see the king. He's not allowed in his dad's presence. And he waits for 2 years, or maybe 3, I can't remember. He waits and waits and waits for his dad to say, come back, Absalom. And his dad won't. And so he starts a fire in the field of the general to try and get his dad's attention. And he still doesn't. And Absalom then turns the whole nation of Israel against his dad. And it all started with an offense that wasn't dealt with an offense that you couldn't let go. There are things you can't let go. There are things you have to deal with. And by not acting, he started a war. Don't start a war by letting things that need to be dealt with not be dealt with. And that can be a lot of different things. But wars are started 2 ways. And one of those is to not deal with the things that do matter, the things that are important, the things that need to have conversation. There's so many things as I read this about how important the words of a dad are. You know, I can tell, especially with my boys, I can tell them something, and they do. I mean, their Colton is really obedient. If I ask him, he doesn't always do it immediately, but he's very, very obedient when I ask him to do something. But when Jeff says something, it's different. There's a different, you agree, Jeff? I mean, there's a different respect, maybe, when the dad says it. There's a difference. And Amnon needed his dad to do that. He needed his dad to say, this was horrible. What were you thinking? There have to be consequences for this. Really, the penalty in Israel for that was death. And nothing happened. And because of that, he lost 2 sons and his only daughter's future. Now, accountability. David's lack of accountability. Okay. So what do you do when you don't know what to do? What do you do? Because there are situations that we face in our families, in our jobs, when you don't know what to do. There seems to be no resolution. There seems to be things that it's like, how can this be okay? How can it be okay when Amnon has raped his sister, for heaven's sake? How can that ever be okay? You pray. And prayer changes things. Prayer changes things. I look through this whole passage, and at no point do I see that David sought the Lord. Not one time did David go to the Lord and say, Lord, this is a mess. What am I going to do? Not one time. He didn't do anything, not even seek the Lord. And so when those offenses come, you have to have conversation. It has to be a conversation, whether it's with your husband about unloading the dishes or whether it's about something serious, those dirty little secrets that nobody talks about. You have to have conversation. And the most important conversation that we have is here. Here. And it takes intentional time of being with the Lord. Ultimately, Amnon made his own decisions, and David's not responsible for those. Honestly. You know, we can have kids that don't do what we want. And I tell you what, Solomon and Absalom and Amnon were all raised by the same dad. And one turned out great, and the others didn't. And so, in the same environment, kids can turn out differently. We can't make their decisions for them. Do you understand what I'm saying? But at the same time, we have to be active in our kids' lives. And I've taught school long enough to know that some parents think that their kids never do anything wrong. Never do anything. Do you agree, Tammy, that there are some of those parents that if something happens, it was not my kid's fault? Well, I'm not that stupid because I know my kids mess up. And then I have parents, when I say this happened and this happened, that say, I will take care of that. And that's the kind of parents I want to work with. And those are the kind of kids that are going to grow up and be productive. We don't help our kids when we circumvent natural consequences that come from misbehavior. We don't. And nobody's kids are perfect. Nobody's are. And so David, with doing nothing, and some that circumvent consequences, that's not the way to raise kids to love the Lord. When kids don't make right decisions, there comes a point where they're out of your control. You can't say go to bed, right? You can't say you need to be home by midnight. There comes a point where they're old enough they have to make their own decisions. And then what do? What do? We pray. And we say, God, I can't do it, but I know you can. And Lord, you know what I used to pray especially when my girls were little, I started praying this. Lord, if they're doing something they're not supposed to, I want to know about it. I did, and he would. If they're doing something they're not supposed to, you show me. And he would. And they aren't perfect. Nobody is. But that's our responsibility, and not just within our families. But when we see injustice, we need to take a stand. There are things that matter. There are things you can't let go. And we need to take a stand. David continued to love, but he didn't love a lot, because when Absalom said come, he didn't come. We have to love, and we have to have guidelines. God, the perfect parent, has kids who reject him. Have you thought about that? God, the perfect parent, has all kinds of kids that want nothing to do with him and make their own choices. So don't let that be a guilt trip. Shake off those guilty. What is that song, Maggie? Shake off that guilty stain. Is that what it is?
Guilty fears.
Guilty fears. Shake off those guilty fears. Even God has kids that reject. So let go of the guilt. It's not over till it's over. Okay. This week we started a war. This week we see starting a war that came from ignoring an offense in a family member toward another. You don't have to shoot the first shot to start a war. Communicate with God. Start praying. And have your eyes wide open. Have your eyes wide open on things. God has good in store when we seek Him. He has good in store. And our prayers make a difference. Let's pray. Father, I thank you, Lord. I thank you that, God, you're a good Father. And that, Lord, we don't have to be perfect, but God, we just have to seek you. Help us to seek you. Help us to run to you, Lord. Help us to ask you, what would you have, Father? What is your desire? What is your will? Help us, Lord, to preach the gospel wherever we go. Wherever you send us, Lord, help us to speak Jesus. Father, we thank you for all that you've done and all that you are. In Jesus' name, amen.